This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 7 amazing individuals. Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Dr. O in Teaberg, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me two voices from the past. Wren Collier.
Everyone, returning champ, ready to take back the belt.
Wait, which belt?
The World Podcasting Heavyweight Championship belt.
Ah, okay. And Octavian.
Hello, I've returned.
Oh, I got a big, I'm ready to take back the belt from Wren, and you're just like, I'm back.
Yeah, basically.
So part of what we're going to talk about tonight is this article that Wren, you found. You want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this is an article, paper actually, a research paper that was in the latest issue of the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The authors of this paper are Brian Lathy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Natalie Roberts, Gordon White, and Damian Howren. And the article is, where did my PDF go? Second, there we go. The article is called Trained Transliminals, Exploring Anomalous Experiences and Psi in Magical Practitioners. So it's a pretty cool idea. Apparently, the reason Gordon White is involved in this is he provided access to the Rune Soup online community, this like premium community that he founded a long time ago. A lot of trained, pretty serious magic practitioners in that group, and he offered these researchers access to them to run psi experiments. In particular, these are like precognition experiments using a smartphone app. Which I think you can actually download on the App Store if you want to play around with yourself. I think it's just called like ESP Tester or something. I used to have it on my phone.
Yeah, I had that on my phone at one point too. I don't think I ever tried it.
Yeah, it's the one that Hal put off, I think, talked about. And the reason I wanted to discuss this article with you guys is because it had rather interesting results. If you went into this thinking that trained magical practitioners, magicians, would be better at psi, I am sad to inform you that they were not. They actually sucked at it.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
They significantly tested below chance. So they were terrible at it, in fact. And the funny part is that the ones who attempted to use ritual magic to better their results actually scored even worse. So it's not what I expected going into it. And yeah, I just thought it was fascinating. I've got a few ideas about what I think may be going on, but I'd love to hear your guys' reactions to the paper. What did you think?
I wasn't that surprised because it's not, when you're doing magic, it's not necessarily focusing on something like precognition per se. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing it in a ritual setting as well, you're not getting in that mindset until you're on the ritual setting. Like it's not necessarily like, going to the gym and exercising and then it carries over to you being able to run up 5 flights of stairs. Mm-hmm. Because your mindset is focused on, okay, I've created this ritual. Once I'm in this ritual, I can get myself in this mindset and I can potentially create certain outcomes. But if you're just set up with a simple psi test or a precognition test, it's just kind of tossed at you without any ritual and it's just has everything stripped away. Yeah, you might actually, it seems to me like you might actually do worse.
I haven't read the paper. I didn't think about that before I came on. So I need to read the paper, but it makes a lot of sense because a lot of the people that I know who are magicians, they are not psychic. Like they're not born with that ability. Any kind of psychic ability that they claim to have usually just comes from their interaction with whether it be what they call spirits or what they call energy, when they start interacting with stuff, then they can sometimes get some residual ability through that. But it seems really rare. And a lot of the people who I do know are psychic are not magicians. Like, for example, my girlfriend is very psychic and very clairaudient. And now she can see stuff. Like, as of recently, she's been able to see orbs in her room that she hasn't before, but I completely believe her just because she can verify it pretty easily. But she doesn't really have any interest in magic, at least the kind of stuff that I'm into or what Wren would be into. She likes her tarot cards and her crystals, but that's the extent of it. So, it doesn't surprise me too much that a lot of people who you would assume would be super psychic through their magic and rituals really aren't. They use, children as scryers for a reason.
Interesting point. I mean, for me, I was having psychic experiences, precognition and stuff, independent of doing magical stuff. And honestly didn't think the magic stuff was ever going to work. As I've mentioned before on the show, I went into it thinking this is bunk and then realized, oh, this actually works. Huh, interesting. But, I've had enough precognition type events where obviously that doesn't apply to me, but also I'm not a ceremonial or really ritual sort of magician. I'm very more chaos and, not so structured.
Does the paper or the tests that they had these people doing, was there any distinction between psychic and ESP ability and just intuition, or do they lump those two things together?
It's not so much that the testing methodology was just testing, using this one particular smartphone application. So it's specifically testing precognition and then scoring, based on how many correct hits they had.
Okay. Because I don't have any psychic ability. That's one of the reasons why I got into magic was to get psychic ability or to increase whatever ability I do have. But for the past 6 months, I have been working almost entirely with divination tools to build up my intuition as sort of like a precursor to any kind of heavy psychic manipulation work or anything like that. So I'm just curious about, I guess that's more of a semantics situation in that context.
Yeah, in this case, it was specifically, measuring success on an actual test. Did they get it or did they not? And yeah, I think I mirror some of what you guys are saying. I think that being an esper and being a magician are not really related to each other. I believe that you can be an esper and a magician, or you can be either. And not one or the other, because I think it's a different skill set, right? And probably something that has a bit of innate inborn talent, right? It's probably not something that you can really teach. And people like Joe McMoneagle say this in some of his books on remote viewing, that certain people just have a talent for it, right? They don't know why, but certain people are just better at it than others. And just anecdotally, what's interesting is that this does replicate some of the effects that I saw in the remote viewing experiments that I ran with a random group of people from Twitter and Discord and other places a few years back. Was that the trained magicians in my test group? Some of them had good results, and some of them kind of bombed. But actually, some of the best results I got were from people who weren't trained magicians or did anything to do with magic or the paranormal or psychic stuff at all. Just the complete normies. Some of them had the most impressive remote viewing results. But I think it's just kind of something that you're born with and that you have. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone can't do it to some extent. I think everyone has some degree of ability, but some people are just born to do it. And yeah, magic itself, one of the big things in this, and I think that people like Dean Radin have a lot of blame to take on for this, is this conflating magic with psi. We're trying to explain magic through the lens of psi, when I don't think that parapsychology research is super equipped to even really explore magic or how magic may work on a fundamental level.
Yeah, there is an assumption, I think, that magic is just basically focused psi. And that makes some sense. But yeah, I don't know. Because also if you're actually using magic and interacting with external spirits, that's different than psi. Right.
And I was going to say, I think there's a big distinction. There's actually a book coming out, and I'm really excited to interview the author about it, because he's writing a book on what happened to magic in the mid to late 1800s and early 1900s. And basically that the entire face of magic changed in that period and after. So before that, pretty much the main engine that most people thought of magic was spirits. You contact a spirit that has this ability, you make a relationship with that spirit, and then you can utilize that spirit for that ability to make your life better. And then it kind of moved away from that into more of an internal psychic, use your own power. Like spirits don't even really get mentioned later and later and later. Like nowadays, I think spirits don't really get talked about unless it's like specifically like old magic or South American magic and more things like that. But like my girlfriend, again, she's very modern magic. So for a long time, she wouldn't use the word spirit. She would only ever use the word energy or the universe. Like she was very uncomfortable with that idea. And it's only been in the last 6 months that I've been able to like not convince her, but like talk to her and have her understand what I'm talking about when I say spirit, and that it's pretty much the same thing that she says energy. So yeah.
I mean, that's largely the fault of like the New Age more than anything. Like,
right.
Yeah, like a lot of like New Age, especially like modern books on like witchcraft and stuff that you'll see at like Barnes and Noble, mostly talk about like vibes and intent, right? More than anything else. They never really bring up spirits, and if they do, it's sort of this vague like goddess or something like that. It's nothing clearly defined,
or it's outright fear, right? Like the modern mindset is a very not anti-spirit, but like it scares a lot of people.
I'd say if it's scary, then they shouldn't even be dabbling in this stuff in the first place.
Well, yeah. One thing that I would like to add to this about sort of being a magician and being psychic. I don't know if you guys heard the episode that Timothy did on Fishing Creek, the experience that me and him and my co-host Ian had back in like March.
No, why don't you tell us? Okay,
so we were trying to find somewhere to go that wasn't going to be like too crazy. We just kind of wanted to take a nice night walk. And there's a place in Lancaster County called Fishing Creek, and it's just a road that goes through a nature preserve. So we go there, we walk the road, and for some reason we all start talking about some pretty personal stuff, mostly on the spiritual side, but things that like you wouldn't really talk about with someone you didn't know very well. And Tim and Ian don't know each other very well at all. I think that would only be like the second or third time they'd ever met. But we were kind of getting into it. And this is important, there is a part of the road where there's a river that goes parallel, and the river goes over the road. So when you walk on the road at this specific point, you're wading through water. Not very high, it's like up to your ankles. So we walk through that. We keep walking down the road, and we get to a point where it happens again, and we don't really want to get our feet wet more, so we decide to walk back. On the way back, there was an X made out of 2 sticks on the hill right to the left of the trail, and nothing too crazy, but like we made note of that. A little bit of a ways, there was an indentation in the door, or in the tree next to the trail, and we kept calling it a gnome door or a fairy door, and Ian knocked on it, and we kind of made a joke about a gnome is going to come out, or that's going to trigger something, and that ended up being what happened. We were basically followed and surrounded by what I can only describe to you as subterranean growls and moans and groans. And Timothy and I were kind of seeing stuff like run between trees, big things. I don't know, I can't say what they were, but we were hearing it, and it got to a point where we were able to communicate with it in a way that, we would ask it to do it for this long, and it would groan for that long, or do this pitch, and it would do that pitch. The interesting thing is, like, Tim and I are both hearing this. We're both experiencing it. Ian isn't. It's not that he's not, but he's not picking up on a lot of the things that are going on. He's just kind of like doing his own thing. He was using a pendulum, and we were kind of surprised that he wasn't picking up on the activity that was going on until he started to use the pendulum, and I guess he was talking to whatever was out there, and he was able to tell us where the knocks and like what direction the knocks and groans would happen before they happened through what he was able to divine with the pendulum. And that from that point on, we were all hearing and experiencing more or less the same thing. We would make our way back to my car. I get in the car to heat it up because it was still a little cold out. Tim and Ian go off in different directions to pee. I hear them talking, and I roll down. I get out of the car, and Tim says he saw a face while he was peeing. And the way he describes it was he was, peeing, and there was a very, very small tree in front of him, and he looks up, and there's a monkey face sticking out of the tree. Makes eye contact with him for he thinks 15 seconds, and then goes back into the tree. And Tim obviously ran around the tree. There's nothing there. So yeah, that was our night at Fishing Creek. The reason why it's significant in this context is Ian said something really interesting, which was that he felt the reason why he was not picking up so much of the Bigfoot activity, or possibly Bigfoot activity,
right,
was that he is not what he calls on the Bigfoot current. He is more interested in just magic and UFOs, if anything. Not that he's not interested in Bigfoot, it's just not his area of research. Mm-hmm. And me and Tim, obviously being obsessed with it, we were able to perceive that energy because we were more in line with that current. So I feel like there's a correlation there with what we're talking about.
That's an interesting story. I did not know this happened to you guys. What are your thoughts, Wren?
Well, so that may be a good way to segue into what the article describes as transliminality. I know you didn't read the article, Octavian, but the way the article describes transliminality is that certain people are more or less transliminal in the sense that things from their unconscious mind leak into their conscious mind, with the general hypothesis that people who experience more transliminality or more end up having more paranormal experiences and tend to believe in paranormal things, and that there's actually a sort of disease state called transliminal disease, which is something that certain people who are considered haunted persons suffer from, as parapsychology has mostly studied these haunted persons in the context of people who have random paranormal experiences or continue to experience them throughout their life, but aren't necessarily engaging with it or involved in any way. But that the magician may represent someone who is a person basically self-medicating transliminal disease, by intentionally seeking out these paranormal experiences and manipulating them to some degree, having some sort of control over them. And as far as that intent and belief goes, Octavian, that's an important part of grimoire magic and something that's repeated in both Picatrix and in Agrippa's occult philosophy, that the operator must have the utmost faith in the efficacy of their operation, that doubt, self-doubt, worrying whether or not it's going to work or going into it thinking that it's not going to work usually spoils it, or you get bad results from it. And this is something that's documented. The paper actually talks about how this is a documented thing in seances, that a lot of times having someone in a seance who is maybe a skeptic or is constantly this isn't real, none of this is all fake, having someone like that present does kind of cause nothing to happen.
Yeah.
It's almost like that person. And what I think is going on there is that part of having these type of experiences is this ability to sort of let your imagination and your sort of unconscious mind take over and direct the experience without thinking too much about it. I think that that's a major element in ritual magic, where the ritual comes into play. The outfits, the tools, the incense, the lighting, sounds, everything, it's all there for a reason, because it's all there to induce this state of transliminality in the magician, to allow them to sort of believe their own bullshit, as it were. And yeah, if you're going into, there's probably even an element of co-creation in this, right? Because if you're going into this experience with preconceived notions about what you're going to experience, of course Tim would see a monkey face in the tree, right, but I wonder if someone else would have seen something different.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you that intent is just as important in ritual magic as it is anywhere else. I think the only distinction is that intent isn't seen as a magical thing in and of itself. It is just a natural thing that is needed to increase the magical power, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, at least in traditional grimoire magic, that 7 days of preparation, of no meat, no eating till sundown, no sexual conduct whatsoever, constant praying, and then the last 3 days of just bread and water. Like, for example, my mentor right now is going through preparation, and he hasn't eaten anything, according to him, in 3 days. That was like 2 days ago. So I don't know where he's at now, but like, he's very routine about this. Like, he takes it very, very seriously. And I have to assume that affects your brain pretty heavily.
Oh yeah.
During the ritual, because if you're not getting the protein you need, it's gonna do some pretty wacky things.
Yeah, I mean, I went into my Minerval initiation into the OTO after a 7-day fast, and just to be clear, like, no one told me to do that. So I don't want anybody being like, "Oh, the OTO makes the people fast for 7 days." It's like, no, that was all me. I was just thinking, like, this is what someone would have done before they would have like undergone the Elysian mysteries or something. So This is what I'm going to do before it. And it definitely made the experience maybe more surreal than it really was. We had a Gnostic Mass right before the initiation, and I remember that cake of light and the wine during the Mass were the first things I'd eaten in 7 days, other than just water. And it tasted like insane. It was one of like the best tasting things I'd ever had. And like, I instantly felt like buzzed from the wine too. It was just wild.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Right now, well, not right now, like on the 30th, I'm going to be doing like the full 7-day preparation for basically what is my first evocation, but it's with the Olympic spirits from the Arbitel. And the thing that I keep getting told over and over and over again, I don't know, Wren, are you familiar with BJ Swain?
I am.
Okay, so he and I talk frequently, and he keeps telling me, like, from his communications with the Olympic spirits, they don't need any of that. They don't even need you to do a full ritual. You can just say the prayer and on their day and hour, and they will come. And I'm like, okay, that, like, I don't disbelieve that, especially coming from BJ, who is an accomplished magician. I absolutely believe that. But being my first ever evocation, I want to try doing it the traditional way and see how that affects me and what that does. Because I'm not psychic, because I don't get spirit vision or clairaudient effects or anything like that, I want to see what the deprivation of human life or removal of human life, because that's essentially what you're doing is you're removing every element of your existence from your existence. And it's more of an experiment than anything to see how that affects me. It might not do anything. It might just be a waste of time. But the thing that I've always been impressed upon by people is a lot of people assume that the instructions from like the Key of Solomon, those are only for the Lesser Key or the Heptameron or like very specific grimoires. And from what I understand, especially in the PGM or the Greek magical papyri and earlier texts, there's a lot missing from the instructions in those rituals. And most likely, those magicians were probably going through an extremely similar 7-day fast and preparation and abstaining from all of life, essentially. And so a lot of people who do PGM stuff that I know have told me, like, yeah, I say the words. I don't do any like prep beforehand, especially not a 7-day prep. I say the words, I do what it says in the text. And if I get a result, I'm usually really surprised by it because they're not getting any kind of confirming effects during the ritual. Meanwhile, my friend Luke did the 7-day purification process for the rite to gladiators, which is where you essentially are asking the spirits of those who died violently. You can trade in the intent for whatever you want, but in the text it's for love. He didn't ask for that. He asked for something else. But he did it in a cemetery. I think it was a veteran cemetery. And he had like a circle down and his robes and everything, which is not in the text. And he was getting like shadow figures moving in between the tombstones, and he was seeing this very vividly. And then I think on his way home, he ran into this really, really weird looking guy with a huge black dog sitting on a bench. And it basically said like, okay, you've been heard. And then he looked behind him and the guy was gone.
Wow.
So in his mind and the way that I think of it, that preparation and that removal of anything else really increased his ability to interact with the spirits that he was attempting to interact with.
My question to you is why? There isn't a correct answer here. This is a quiz, and you're going to be graded on this.
Do you want this like the Stephen Skinner version? Because that's the one I always
Sure. What does old Steve have to say about this? Because Steve says a lot of things about a lot of stuff that I don't really agree with anymore. But I'm curious.
I'm the same way, but I like his approach on this specific thing. From his experience, spirits have a very good sense of smell.
Oh yeah, yes. I knew you were going to say that one. Okay, go on. Yeah.
It kind of goes twofold. The practical reason is they can smell sex, they can smell all the food that we eat, they can smell all of the daily stuff that we don't even think about. To them, it emits a physical scent that is very repugnant to them. And so by avoiding those things and by not doing those things, you are making it a more pleasant environment for the spirit to show up. That's the practical reason. The second reason is because if you go by the cosmology of Solomonic magic, the ability for you to communicate with these spirits comes from whatever your Adonai is, whatever your up high is. You are purifying yourself to be closer to that power, so that way it can clearly come, easier. It's an easier way for it to come through you and boss around these spirits or communicate with these spirits, however you want to do it. But you essentially create yourself into a portal by getting higher up and ascending from the mortal plane into the celestial.
Yeah, the second one's closer to it. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea is that while you are incarnated in flesh, you are in matter. Like matter itself is sort of like a corrupted version of reality. And as long as you are incarnated in matter, there are certain limitations placed on your ability to interact with the anima mundi. And by fasting and doing all these things, you're removing yourself from the trappings of matter, right? And becoming closer to, drawing closer to the forms themselves, which allows magic to work better. But yeah, the sense of smell thing's hilarious. I don't know why he got so stuck on that, but
well, again,
I don't think it's it. I don't think that's it, Stephen.
My buddy Luke, the reason why he attests to that is he did a conjuration with like a DCI or DSIC conjuration, and the spirit came, and the first thing, because Luke had not done any kind of like prep work beforehand or diet, the first thing it said was like, you reek. That's according to my buddy. So, and I've heard this before. So
but they don't have noses. How are they smelling? Smelling is. I think what's happening. I think where this confusion is coming about is because they're speaking in metaphors. Like you reek doesn't mean that like you actually reek. I mean, yes, that is part of it. Maybe he did actually stink, and they do like good smells. They do like incense and stuff, but it's more like they're speaking more of in like a metaphorical sense. Like,
oh yeah,
your soul is too weighted down by matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is interesting because a lot of people say that like if you're communicating with demons, then if you're to purify yourself removes yourself from their state, and it's harder for them to like corrupt you. So you'd think that these spirits, being unclean spirits, would welcome someone who was unclean like them, or enjoy it because it's easier for them to vibe with that energy.
Yeah.
One of the things
that's the thing. A lot of these spirits in the Grimoires, I don't think I would necessarily classify as unclean spirits. Aryan spirits, sublunar, yes, but not unclean. It's like unclean spirits are like a very specific category that you shouldn't and have no real reason to conjure in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. When I first got into this, when I first started the podcast, this was one of the first things I really wanted to experiment with, using certain magical techniques to contact the paranormal. And my theory was this, right? So a lot of people who see cryptids or see spirits, it's more often than not a negative experience where these things are terrifying them. They're aggressive. They're just not pleasant to be around or to be seen. And that's why a lot of people end up getting like PTSD from seeing Bigfoot or Dogman or not so much ghosts, but like even UFOs.
Yeah.
And so my thinking was this, right? if you did like the 7-day purification and you went out looking for Bigfoot or looking for UFOs or anything, how would that change the nature of the interaction, if at all? Would it make it more pleasant? Would it make it easier to communicate on a more even scale? Does it balance the scale at all? Yeah, that was my idea. I haven't had a chance to enact that yet, but
well, okay. So you were talking about people doing things by the book and people using grimoires, and you brought up a bunch of different grimoires. But have you read 3 books of occult philosophy?
Most of it.
Okay. So why are you still using grimoires? Because you shouldn't need grimoires anymore.
Which book is that from? Like, of the 3 books?
It's not from any of the books. Just the 3 books are like, the 3 books teach you how to do magic. If you read and understand the 3 books, like, you don't need grimoires anymore. You don't need instructions because you have all of those components, right? It's like learning to cook versus using a recipe. Grimoires are recipe books. They don't teach you how to cook. 3 books teaches you how to cook. And once you know how to cook, you don't need recipes anymore.
That's a good point. I'll have to revisit the 3 books because it's been a while. I read that when I first got into stuff and kind of just put it down.
Yeah, I think it's ripe for a reread because I think once you read it and understand, like, all these people, you'll understand very quickly that all of these people online who are arguing about grimoires, because you sort of got at this, right? That different grimoires like disagree about different points, right? And that, you know, they leave out stuff. And that's because in a large way, a lot of the grimoires are missing like key components, key like philosophical components of magic and how it works at the very basic level. Because it's stuff that it assumes you already know, right? And people, if you really ever want to like tell that someone has no idea what they're actually talking about, there are plenty of people online who complain about, oh, there's nothing practical in 3 books of occult philosophy. Agrippa doesn't like give you any rituals to actually do, which is nonsense. Like, he doesn't need to. If you read it and you understand it, like, you can make your own rituals because you understand the components that go into ritual. You understand what everything does in the ritual, like the 3 worlds framework. Like, you understand how to do magic, and therefore you don't need a book to tell you like the prayers anymore. You can write your own prayers, and they'll work just fine.
Right.
Like, it's funny. Like, chaos magic people kind of understand this on an instinctual level. The problem is there's no guardrails to it. Like, they think anything goes. It's like there are like certain parameters that need to be like set properly for it to work the way it needs to work. I mean, one element that's missing from most of the grimoire tradition is the astrological element. And Agrippa is very clear in 3 books, like that's like one of the key parts of magic. Like, if you're not using the astrology to do magic, like to time your operations when they're most likely to succeed, like, then like everything you do is going to be hit or miss, and you're never going to be able to figure out why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because you're like literally not paying attention to one of the main variables in the equation. Grimoires, they just like gloss over a lot of that stuff. And when I started actually using astrological elections to do magic, wow, all of a sudden it works really well. And I get like pretty repeatable results, and it does exactly what I'm needing it to do. Like, you know, it's like, it's amazing once you actually start paying attention to it, how much better you are as a magician.
I have never paid attention to astrology when doing magic, and never had issues with it being hit and miss.
Well, you just got lucky then.
Maybe. I mean, because a lot of it is instinctual.
Didn't you do a ritual to get like a certain amount of money, and then you had a car accident and the insurance payment was the money?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You see, that's the sort of thing that I think, like, if you had the astrology of that moment, you could probably look at it and understand like why it manifested in that way.
It was the easiest way to get me $2,000.
Not just that, but that like there could have been other elements at play there.
Possibly, yeah. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying I've never actually, because I know next to nothing about astrology. So,
my grandmother is an astrologer. She wrote a bunch of books for Llewellyn. She's now republishing, trying to get those books rewritten and republished. But what name did she write under? Julia Lupton.
Okay,
these are back.
Sounds really familiar to me. Why do I know that name?
It was she was on my podcast, but she wrote the Instant Horoscope Predictor and the Instant Horoscope Reader, and then the Astrological Baby Name Book.
Okay.
I can send you guys links. You can get them on Amazon. They're out of print, but you can still find them some places.
I know I've seen one of her books in a like a half price books or something.
Oh yeah,
like,
I'm sure.
It sounds so familiar.
She was known as the astrologer's astrologer back in like the 80s and 90s. She was a big deal back then. I don't know, what her relevance is now, but I'm trying to get it back up now that she's republishing them.
Yeah.
where I'm going with that is I grew up with astrology. I'm not good at astrology by any means, but I have a very strong interest in it. When I got into magic, specifically ritual magic, I wanted that astrological component to be stronger. But whenever I would talk to people, and you can find like any magician, I can literally cite at least 3 specific interviews with people like Adley Nichols and Frater Ashton Chassan and my mentor Luke, who've all said that because you're dealing with quote unquote sublunar spirits, astrological timings don't matter. They don't play into anything because the spirits themselves are not affected by the astrological alignments and the effects of that. And so I was always like, that's why I was really interested in the Picatrix, because it's all astrological magic. The problem is it's really, really hard. Even my grandmother who read it with me was like, she wouldn't attempt any of it because of how hard the timings are. So yeah, it's interesting because I really wanted that astrological element to be stronger. And I read multiple places that it just wasn't that important back then. And it wasn't important to that specific area of esotericism.
Yeah. And then I look, I'm not trying to cast shade on BJ. I love BJ, but I recently listened to an interview he did with Rufus Opus where they said the same thing that I just said, like, oh, sometimes magic just doesn't work. Why does it not work sometimes? And they were sort of like throwing their hands up in the air and being like, I don't know, maybe it has to do with the components or something like that. And I'm just sitting there like, well, it's because none of you ever pay attention to the astrological conditions, you know? Like the astrology affects everything. Like the stars are still up in the sky, right? Like it doesn't matter if the spirit's sublunary. That just means it's under the stars. Like of course the stars still affect it. Like it's still part of the universe. And if you got to think about astrology as sort of being like the conditions of the sea, right? If you think of your connection between yourself and a spirit requiring some like distance in the sort of metaphysical underworld, right? Like the astrological conditions are the conditions of the sea on that voyage you're going to take. And of course, like you might be able to get there when the seas are rough, right? But it may take a lot longer or never happen at all. You might get lost at sea. But if you go when you've got headwinds, or tailwinds, and you're able to move on a like calm, easy sea, like everything's just going to work better and easier. It doesn't like, it's not like a either or like binary kind of thing. It's not like if you don't pay attention to the astrology, your magic's never going to work. It's just that like when you start to pay attention to it, your magic works even better. And you actually get the stuff like making lunar mansion talismans from Picatrix and actually choosing like a really good election to do them on. And then everyone I give that talisman to, like I make like a bunch of them, and everyone I give them to experiences some kind of like supernatural good luck within days, And it's like impossible to look at that and be like, not say that was like an unmitigated success.
Can I get one?
Those have all been given out. Sorry. Yeah, but I do have some third mansion talismans that I just made. I made back in January that I'm just finishing up now. I had to put emeralds and stuff in them. And if I have enough of those, I can give you one.
Awesome.
Those are
I mean, if you're passing them out, I'll take one.
Yeah, it's for the third mansion Althariah, which is associated with the Pleiades, and it's supposed to make you better at hunting. It's good for voyages and the acquisition of all good things. So just generally like good luck.
So let me ask you this. Why would the stars matter at all?
So I guess it really depends on your, cosmology, right? Like I could come up with all these different reasons about it being like psychological or something, but I just stick to the, pre-modern conception of it that the stars shoot laser beams and those laser beams do things. And that's about as complicated as I make it. Like, because ultimately to me, like, it doesn't matter how it works, like the mechanism of it. It's just that I know it works. Like, I know that when I pay attention to it, and it's not like some people, like they let the astrology like control their entire lives or think like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't screw people over because I'm a Scorpio and that's just what Scorpios do. Like natal astrology and horoscopes and all that kind of stuff, like I could care less about. It's all just electional astrology for me. It's just like, is this moment in time, does it contain specific like occult virtues that I want to capture, right? Like, like recently I made some Mars Kazemi talismans, like it was earlier this year or last year when there was that Mars Kazemi, and I wanted to capture that particularly like Martian energy, right, in that virtue. in something that I could like store and give to other people as gifts. And I guess if you think of it like archetypes, right? Like each of the 7 planets represents some sort of like Jungian archetype. Mars being the archetype of like war and violence and masculine energy, Venus being comfort, beauty, luxury, and feminine energy, like the sun being like rulership and riches, health and medicine. Like all of the planets represent something. And they have various configurations they can be under. Like you have the 2 malefics, Mars and Saturn, who are considered sort of the sharper planets. And then you have the 2 benefics, which are Jupiter and Venus, which are sort of the beneficial planets that always bring good things, right? And based on all of these planets' relationships with each other, any moment in time, one of those influences can be stronger than all the others. That's what the Arabic astrologers referred to as the Almatin, or like the victor. So at every moment in time, one planet is stronger than all the other planets. And all of the associated aspects of life, all of the things that planet represents are heightened in that moment. And you have to pay attention to that, because it's like if you go to create like a wealth talisman, and wealth and like the acquisition of wealth and is largely ruled by Jupiter, you do this type of operation, you try to conjure a Jovian angel to imbue this talisman to ensoul it, like while Jupiter is in detriment or fall, right? Well, it's like square Saturn or Mars in a cadent house. Like then like your communication with that angel is probably not going to be effective. Like your evocation is probably not going to work. And the talisman that you create at best doesn't do anything. And at worst does the opposite of what you wanted it to do.
So let me ask you a question, Wren.
Mm-hmm.
I'm planning to the evocation of Ophiel, the Olympic spirit of Mercury, on the 6th of next month. Mercury goes into retrograde on the 4th of next month.
Yeah.
Should I find a different day or a different Wednesday? Or is that not going to affect?
No, it'll affect it. I just think it's worth a try. It's not like it's going to blow up in your face or anything. The Olympic spirits are chill, but it may just not work.
Okay.
Like the classic conception of a planet in retrograde is that the planet is absent rather than, opposite day. It's more like it just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to call something mercurial while Mercury is in retrograde, like the quality of that communication may be particularly difficult, right? Like it's like trying to talk to someone on a really bad connection. I mean, it's worth a try to see if you get any results. I mean, go for it. Like there's no reason you can't. Or wouldn't.
Now, given that, like, we'll just take Mercury retrograde as an example. Do you find that consecrating your tools and items is affected astrologically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it affects everything all the time. That's why it's such a key thing. That's why Agrippa emphasizes it so much. That's why all the older grimoires emphasize it. Like you see this degradation of the grimoire tradition as you go further on, where the astrological components are less and less emphasized. And I think it's the worse for it. But yeah, I mean, in Agrippa, you have this threefold world system where you have basically 3 components to magic. Like you have the natural world, which are, literally like the physical things you use in magic. So the incenses, the stones, the plants, colors, sight, smells, elements, all the things of the natural world that you use. And you have the intelligent world, or the world of the stars, astrology. You're like going up a level. So that includes all of the astrological considerations that you need to go into before you do a magical operation. So, and it's like this chain of hierarchy, right? You start with the materials. You need all the right stuff to start with, all the physical things. You need the right wood, right plants, right smells, right stones. And then you need the right time, which is your astrology. That's your timing. And then you have the divine world, which is the world of prayers and rituals and spirits and angels and demons. So we put those all together. You need the physical stuff, you need the timing right, and you need to know the right spirits to call for a given purpose. You put all 3 of those things together and you have effective magic. Any one of those components are missing, like your results are going to be suboptimal at best and nothing at worst.
Okay, that makes sense. Transferring that idea into the contemporary paranormal world, do you think, obviously they're not going to do this because they don't believe in any of it, but like your regular Bigfoot investigator, is it beneficial for them to look at the astrological timing of the day that they're planning on going out and looking for Bigfoot, or a UFO person, or a ghost hunter? Do you feel that? Okay.
Absolutely. John Keel even said this, and he didn't use an astrological framework for it.
Well, I know that Wednesday is like the best day to see UFOs per John Keel.
And what
So I
day
definitely
is
had that.
Wednesday?
Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah, but what day is Wednesday?
Oh, it's mercurial, so very very liminal.
Exactly. It's between two worlds. It's male and female. It's opposites united. Like, that's Mercury.
Mhm.
And yeah, absolutely. Mercury's day would be the day I would expect to see the most paranormal stuff. There's astrology behind it, because that's a factor. The day and hour are a factor that go into the calculation of the Alma 10. Like, my Alma 10 for my birth chart is Mars. And partially that's because Mars was in Aries. It was in its rulership when I was born, but also because I was born on a Tuesday in the hour of Mars. So my chart is like Mars all the way down. And so that suddenly made sense when I was older, because I was like, oh yeah, I went to school for military history. Scenes of conflict and battle like bring me to tears of joy. Like, my favorite color is red. I really like martial arts and wrestling and karate and stuff. Like swords. Suddenly half my life made way more sense once I realized this.
I need to do my Alma Den then.
I can help you do the calculation. I've got a spreadsheet that'll do most of the work for you if you want.
So cool. I have a really terrible chart. Even my grandmother told me, like, your chart is really difficult.
Oh, that sucks. I'm happy. I'm very happy with my chart. It has some weirdness in it. Like, I've got like 3 planets in my 7th house, which is has a lot about my love life. But overall, it's actually a pretty auspicious, like, lucky chart in terms of where certain things are. So
I have almost all of my planets in the 12th house.
oh God, that is really bad.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
What does that mean?
The 12th house is the last house. It's the house of like death and destruction.
Mm. No wonder you
it's like literally the worst place for anything to be in your chart.
No wonder you like lo-fi black metal on cassette tapes.
Yeah. And I'm a Scorpio. So
what sign is in your 12th house?
Oh God, let me see. I don't have it memorized. I have an app.
Do you know what your rising is?
My rising is Leo.
So whatever is before Leo or after Leo. Wait, get my directions correct.
According to my app, my Cancer is in my 12th.
Okay. Do you have the moon in your 12th?
Let me see.
Because at least then the moon would be in its rulership.
No, I think that my moon is in the 5th house.
Oh, okay.
I can send you my chart.
So, yeah, I'd love to take a look at it.
So
I'm pretty bad. I'm not like I'm all talking on this show like I'm some kind of like astrology expert, but I'm still learning this stuff too. Like, it's only in the last couple of years that I had this big revelation about how important it was to like my magic functioning correctly and really like focusing on it and trying to get better at it. So I'm still very much a student in this.
And the problem is, like, the one thing that drives me nuts is that my grandmother, even though she started with William Lilly's Christian astrology and is very well versed in the traditional astrological texts, she still, because she has a PhD in chemistry and is very of that mind, she still kind of takes astrology from a reductionist mindset. Yeah. So like when I try and talk to her about astrological magic, she, just keeps saying, oh, those planets are too far away. They don't have any effect on you. It doesn't work like that. But she can't really explain how it works. She just knows it does. Yeah. But she still is very hesitant about the actual like spiritual magical aspect of astrology.
Yeah. I think that's a consequence of the time frame in which she was doing a lot of that work. Like the whole idea of like psychological astrology, right? Very similar to like the psychological model of magic, where it's like, oh, it's all just in your head and you're just changing your viewpoints on your consciousness and stuff. That was a plague that affected astrology, I think, during the New Age in like the 70s and 80s, that astrology was really reduced to being this like purely psychological thing in an attempt to like legitimize it, to materialists, when that isn't, nobody should have worried about that at all. But thankfully we have people like Chris Brennan today that help incorporate some of that traditional like Hellenistic astrology like back into it, where there are actually effects. Like guys like Chris Warnock especially have done an immense amount of work in like making astrological magic a thing again.
Yeah, he's cool. I had him on my show. I actually had my grandmother interview him with me, and he was like somewhat hostile to my grandmother because she kept kind of asking things from a reductionist point of view, and she was being very innocent about it. Like, she wasn't trying to like persuade him that the spiritual aspect doesn't matter. She was just trying to figure out where the similarities and differences were in their mindsets, and like he got kind of testy about it. So yeah he's kind of ornery, so I could see that. I love the guy, but yeah.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Quick mid-show break here. Some contact info. and a recommendation. So contact info is easy. WhereDidTheRoadGo.com has everything. It has everything from my snail mail address to various email addresses if you want to send in stories of weird things that have happened to you for us to discuss on the air. It's stories at WhereDidTheRoadGo.com. And that is, you can find all that on the contact info on the page, as well as links to all our social media, our Discord, our X page, our Facebook page, our Facebook group, everything. And shows all the way back to the beginning. As some of you may have noticed, we're now also being hosted by Acast, which means you are going to get commercials here and there, unless you're a Patreon, in which case the only commercials you'll ever hear are the ones that are put in by me for like Strange Realities or something like that. But the Acast commercials will not be in the Patreon versions. If you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. You get commercial-free shows, you get them a week early, and you get extra content with pretty much every show. And lately some odd videos that I've recorded. So yeah, that's happening. And as for a recommendation, I'm going to go with an old podcast. I haven't seen anything or heard anything recently that has really impressed me. And I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to recommend. And I have never recommended Station to Station. And I'll just, I'll read what this little about says about the show. A handful of fading memories, the remains of a research project, and a garbled tape recorder are all Dr. Miranda Kwan has to her name when her research partner goes missing on the eve of a 10-week ocean expedition. Now, she must try to find closure in the midst of a rapidly unraveling conspiracy surrounded by a handful of unlikely allies, several likely threats, and the icy waters of the North Pacific. Something sinister lurks in the heart of the research ship Astrid, and Miranda must rely on her wits to piece together an answer. It says Station to Station is a sci-fi horror audio drama about loss, memory, morality, and what gets left behind. And it's really, really good. It's a few years old now. I don't know exactly when it came out, but it's very good. So it's worth checking out. All right, back to the show.
So I am here with Wren and Octavian. And Octavian, you've mentioned a couple times your podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
Strange Dominions podcast.
Okay. You went quiet for a while.
I did. And I came back and then I went quiet again because my life has just been too much to talk about, honestly. Like, I don't even know where to begin.
Okay.
But I am coming back. I have a couple shows in the pipeline that are going to be coming out probably next week. I have a theory that I wanted to run by you guys, especially Grant, on this subject, actually. So in a lot of the Grimoires, when it comes to, they don't get mentioned very often, but when it comes to things like nature spirits, sometimes the Fae, they usually get put under the Planetary Association of Saturn. Now, in the Book of Oberon, fairies are given the Planetary Association of the Sun and the Moon. But the Saturnine attributions to nature spirits is really interesting to me. The book that I'm actually going to be working from, the Arbitel, talks about the spirit of Saturn being Eritron, and his office, his ability, he has a couple. The one that is of great interest to me is he reunites man with the small hairy men. Now, they're probably talking about pygmies or gnomes, but I think that hairy aspect, it's important. And it's under Saturday. Now, if we look at a lot of the Bigfoot reports, I feel like that lines up with Bigfoot. I feel like Bigfoot does have and exhibits a lot of Saturnine qualities, especially in its sort of guardian role of the forest. He limits, or it limits, man's presence in certain places, chasing people out, the aggression, the trying to think of what else. But that's just where this is a very new theory. I just kind of started thinking about it, but I wanted to get your take on it.
Well, I think that association with Saturn might be due to their possible association with death, right? In the underworld.
Yeah.
The little hairy ones, that's an interesting one too, because that phrase also appears in the Bible, specifically referring to the Seirim, which are some of the spirits that the Hebrews are warned about, that in the wilderness there are the Lilin or the screech owls and the Seirim, which the King James Version I think translates as satyrs, but the word Seirim really just means hairy one, or like hairy people. And they were said, to live out in the wilderness, and you were specifically warned against making offerings to them or worshiping them.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And again, it's just, I think it's just further evidence that people have always been interacting with these things out there.
Well, this is true. I had a couple of things from much earlier. One, the initial subject here when we were talking about magicians and psi, one of the papers we've covered on this show, and I don't remember if we did it on the main show or if we did in the Patreon segment, but there was a paper released that was showing that solar activity affects different types of psi. So during high solar activity, certain types of psi are more active. I forget which it is off the top of my head. Like there's passive psi and there's non-passive psi. And like say during high solar activity, passive psi is more active. During and the opposite happens. So solar activity has a direct effect, which is something Robert Schoch said many, many years ago in one of his books, talking about the effect of solar activity on psi research. But it turns out that it affects certain things positively and certain things negatively, and then the opposite occurs. And I wonder how much that also plays into any of these type of testing systems too. Like when people are doing the tests, like how much is that affecting things?
My first thought goes to, in the Key of Solomon, I'm sure it's in other things, but in the Key of Solomon, Wren, you'll have to help me with the specifics. There are certain days of the moon, like the age of the moon. It should always be, more or less the rising of the increase of the moon. So when
waxing.
The waxing of the moon. It's the second, the fourth, the sixth, and like 5 or 6 others.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal with that. They do that in the Key of Solomon, where it's like these like alternating days or something. I don't. That's something that's like idiosyncratic to the Key of Solomon, and the way it's so weird that it makes me feel like it's like somebody like half remembering how lunar mansions work or something. Like generally, like rule of thumb is that you want to do magic while the moon's light is increasing, because the moon is the lens through which all the other planets filter down through to us, right? It's the lens through which reality is manifested. And so if that lens is decreasing, or worst case a new moon, right, where it's dark, like then none of those virtues can reach us in the physical world. But if the moon's light is increasing, and best like a full moon, then that aperture is wide open, right? So all those occult virtues can reach us more easily.
That might play into these moon days with psychic ability.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen, actually, I wish I had my copy of Beyond Telepathy. I need to get that back from somebody, but I think there are a couple of different things like this that Andrija Pruharich brings up in Beyond Telepathy. One in particular is the effect of thunderstorms on psi. That large electrical storms actually inhibit psi function in studies that he was familiar with. And this is something that shows up in Grimoires, which that ties in the whole other thing. It was like, why was Andrija Pruharich familiar with the Key of Solomon? That's kind of creepy, but
why?
Either way, I don't know why. That's what I'm asking.
No, I mean, why is that creepy?
Because it possibly ties into, well, it's like, why was this like CIA adjacent guy, like MK Ultra adjacent guy reading Grimoires? And what level of familiarity with the Grimoires does this imply certain elements of the intelligence community had?
See, that doesn't surprise me. Like I would think they would look at all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but it shines some light on some, Redford final events kind of stuff that I think it opens that up a little bit more. Like the report that Ray Boucher had said that, the CIA was using EVP to talk to demons, right? Like that kind of stuff. Like, I'm like, well, if they were familiar with the Key of Solomon, maybe. But on the other hand, I think a lot of the Collins elite mythology came about because like if somebody's familiar with the Q Solomon in the 1960s, they got to be reading Crowley's edition of it, right?
Yeah.
And via Crowley, you're going to find Kenneth Grant around the same time when he's publishing his books. And so much of that Collins Elite mythology comes from Kenneth Grant. I mean, it's just lifted whole cloth, right? The idea that Beck Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard opened up a portal to another dimension with Babylon working, and that's where all the UFOs came from and everything. Like that's straight out of Kenneth Grant. I mean, like, and then so somebody at this, some group of people at the State Department, like, we're reading this and we're like, holy Christ, we're in a spiritual warfare with like flying saucer demons, and see, it's all in this book. But that's a whole like kind of theory that I'm working on at the moment to try to figure out what the connections are there. But back to the topic, Pruharich brings up thunderstorms as a possible having an inhibitory effect, like on psi phenomena. And in the Q Solomon, I believe it does talk about like, not doing this type of work when the skies are, cloudy. Yeah, exactly. Which, goes back to my earlier topic. Well, obviously, because the stars matter and there's clouds and the stars can't, their laser beams can't hit you.
There's also the consideration of like, let's say you're trying to call in aerial spirits. If the sky is cloudy and it's affecting air and wind, then you may not be able to get to it clearly enough.
Yeah, exactly. And there also is too there's something in, I believe, Mind Trek by Joe McMoneagle, where there's like two different studies. One was on whether or not geomagnetic fluctuations affected remote viewing efficacy. And the results were like kind of inconclusive. It seemed like it had some effect, but it wasn't like a strongly correlated effect. And what was interesting was the second study where they were measuring the effective sidereal time on remote viewing efficacy. Basically like what was in the sky above the remote viewer while they were trying to do their test or their task or whatever. And it turned out that when the galactic center, like the center of the Milky Way, was in the sky, wherever the remote viewer was working, that actually significantly decreased their accuracy. And I've got some like half thoughts about that are kind of half baked. But if the core of the Milky Way is a cluster of supermassive black holes, maybe that has something to do with like information getting lost there or something. I mean, I don't know like why that even really would work, but I think there's something to that.
See, I go with the electric universe theory, which seems to work better, that the galactic center is a graviton, which also could potentially affect everything. It would even make more sense that it would affect everything because it's electrical and it's affecting the entire galaxy. So, if you're familiar at all, the silence says you're not.
I have not read the Electric Universe.
There's various different books on the electric universe, but when they photographed the quote black hole at the center of the Milky Way, Walt Thornhill from Thunderbolts had said I think it's a graviton, they called it, and he described exactly what it would look like. He even made a drawing pre them pointing the telescope and getting the image. And of course, when they got the image, they were like, oh, that's not what we expected. And they tried to explain how they were looking at a black hole, but it's exactly what Walt Thornhill drew and what he described they were going to see, like to a T. And so the idea of the electric universe is that things aren't being held together by gravity. They're being held by electrical force.
Oh, okay.
And you're seeing this come out a little bit more and more in cosmology and stuff and like space science and stuff like that. It's because Velikovsky was the first one to really throw this idea out there in modern science. It's just like taboo to even consider it.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's electrical, that makes a lot of sense as to why it might affect us, even as far away as the center of the Milky Way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As much as any of this stuff makes sense, really.
Right.
But I guess my point in bringing up the solar activities, there's so many different factors, subtle factors that can affect how we perceive, paranormal phenomena. These subtle paranormal phenomena, whether it be psi or magic or whatever, that it's so hard to say even what's going on because we don't even know the list of things that are genuinely influencing any of the things we're trying to then study.
Right.
Which is frustrating. Because you can do, psi tests, and, that was Schock's thing. He said that psychics in laboratory experiments scored significantly higher during high solar activity. Across the board throughout, however many decades that the psi tests were going on. So his conclusion was that either A, there's been a conspiracy since the beginning of psi testing to only score high during high solar activity, or these are legitimate results and high solar activity affects certain types of psi. But again, if you're saying astrology then also affects it, like solar activity is a little more pronounced. That hits us with a lot of force. Astrology, like to me, I need to know what it is about astrology that's doing that. If it's just maybe it's that when the Earth is in certain positions, it's not actually the stars, but the stars might be the navigation post of where we are, and at those points, certain things work better.
Right. I'm not up on astrology to really talk about it. I know that Wren isn't either, but he also is more than I am. Is Wren still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm just listening.
Oh, okay.
Thoughts, Wren?
I mean, I don't know much about the electric universe stuff, but I'll say that like the astrology stuff, you can kind of also, if you want to get very like neo-Platonic about it, you can look in like book 2 of Agrippa, where he talks about the world soul and how each one of these stars sort of carries certain virtues. These virtues are distributed into the material world. It's kind of like, how do I say this? Like, it's not the stars themselves, but like a metaphorical version of the stars. That's the thing that's actually doing the thing. Like, this doesn't really make sense, but like, I don't think there's anything particularly magical about like the actual planet Mars, right? And like what Mars is doing. But Mars, in a metaphorical sense, represents certain things, and it exists in both, its physical form as this like, physical planet up there, but also in like a metaphysical form, where it represents a particular like sphere of existence. And all of these different spheres are this chain of manifestation coming from the endless divine light of God down to what we experience as material reality. Like the different planets represent these different like spheres through which reality is made manifest. They're like the prism that splits God's light into all of these little individual elements that make up what we experience day to day. And there is some relationship between the location of the actual physical planets and the distribution of those virtues and those influences. Now, the actual like hard scientific mechanism behind it, I don't know, and I don't think we'll ever know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But like they're like represented. Like I like your idea of it sort of being like a map almost. It's like representing a particular place in space time, and how it represents a particular position that we're in, and that position may be more favorable to certain esoteric operations than others. That's the thing I think a lot of people, when they look at astrology, don't really think about, but it can be useful to pull up an astrological chart and just walk outside. Because all an astrological chart is just a map of the sky.
Yeah.
It's a map of a particular time and place, right? Because where you are on Earth also matters. There's certain parts of the sky that you can see that other parts of the world can't. And like when you actually understand like the ascendant, it's literally just the horizon. It's where the sun comes up, right? Like if a star is on the ascendant, if Venus is on the ascendant, you can look, on the horizon and see Venus there. It's like once you make that connection between like the actual sky and the act of doing an astrological chart, it really opens it up a bit.
Seriah, have you ever heard of the book Gateways Through Light and Shadow?
I don't think so.
I think you would really get a lot out of that. Basically, it's this magician, Frieder Aschen-Chassan, and it is a transcript of his conversations with a bunch of different spirits. So he does the 7 archangels, the 4 directional kings, the 7 Olympic spirits, and then a bunch of like Celtic pagan gods, because his scryer is a druid, and they get some of those to come through. And whether you believe that that's who they're talking to or not, or if any of this really happened, it gives a really, really great example of the Hermetic philosophy, which is what Wren is talking about, the Neoplatonic philosophy, from the angel's perspective and from the spirit's perspective. And it talks about how they view all of this and what they think their role is and how they interact with us and how we interact with them from their perspective. It's a really, really good book.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Just don't, if anybody, I'm not going to talk bad about the book. It's a fine book. But if anybody picks up that book, please, for the love of God, don't use Ashen Chassan's design for the table of practice. Like, it is the most harebrained thing I've ever seen. For a guy who claims to be a Grimoire purist, by the book, he made some changes to that table that make absolutely no sense. Like trying to spell the Spirit King's names in Greek and like not actually using the right letters.
Yeah, I did notice that.
It's pretty embarrassing, honestly. Just use the design that's in Drawing Spirits into Crystals and Francis Barrett's The Magus. It's a perfectly good design. Or read Sam Bloch's. Actually, another really good resource for people who are interested in the Drawing Spirits into Crystals methodology is Sam Bloch, Polyphonies, who has the blog Digital Ambler, has a free and incredibly comprehensive multi-part series on the Trithemian conjuration, and like how to build the tools, how to do the conjurations, like a bunch of thoughts and stuff on it. It's extremely, extremely good stuff.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you're speaking a completely different language to some people out there.
Yeah, this is really getting into a deep cut territory, but. I mean, that whole Trithemian system, using the table of practice, that makes up like the core of my magical system as well.
It's the most accessible way of getting into traditional spirit conjuration. And if you want to get even more accessible, you can go with Rufus Opus's 7 Spheres method, which essentially takes the idea of Trithemius and takes out a bunch of different tools and just leaves you with a candle, a crystal ball, a stick of incense, and a table. And that's it. He doesn't talk about preparation. He doesn't even recommend like traditional robes. His philosophy is you wake up one morning, you use the day and hour of the spirit. But other than that, as long as you have those really, really simple tools, they will come. And so a lot of people I know got into this stuff through 7 Spheres.
Yep, that's how I first found out about Trithemian stuff.
Okay.
I will say that like I have a big gripe with a lot of guys like Ashen Chassan and Rufus when it comes to the way they describe their spirit interactions. And this is something that I think for new people is very difficult to understand, and something that the authors don't do a good job of explaining in a way that doesn't that sets proper expectations, right? Like when I talked to Rufus, because I read all of his descriptions of like him talking to the Archangel Gabriel and everything, seeing Gabriel's face in the water surface, and I talked to him and I was like, did you actually see that and hear that, right, with your like physical eyes? And he was like, no, I heard it in my head. I saw it in my mind's eye, and I thought to myself,
I really hate
that's not what you wrote.
Right,
You wrote it like it was something that you were seeing with your physical eyes. And there's a big difference there. And I think a lot of people get into this stuff thinking that they're going to see something dramatic like that. And it's possible. Like I can count on one hand the amount of times I've seen something like physically manifest. It's been extremely rare. But there's a huge element of just like, and this goes back to the original topic of this episode, like the paper we were talking about. That transliminal state is very important to doing like proper spirit work and scrying, like being able to listen your mind and look at your mind's eye and understand when things come into it that you didn't put there, right? And like, to give you a good example of this, when I do a lunar mansion talisman ritual, I have a thing that no Grimoire told me to do, but I do anyways. It's a thing that I started doing, part of my practice. And it's after I conjure the angel of the mansion and ask them to insult a talisman that I've created, I will then ask the spirit for the true image of the mansion. Because all the books, like Picatrix and stuff, they have the image of the mansion. Like the image of the third mansion, Althariah, is a seated woman with her, I think, left hand over her head, right? That's the image that's in the books. But what I've learned is that there's also a true image for each mansion. And this may differ from person to person, but it can only be given to you by the spirit. And when I did that, I asked for it to give me the true image. And in my head, I saw like twisting, like I saw the lady sitting there, but then I saw like her arms, both of her arms raise and her arms start intertwining almost like a DNA helix that became this like serpent. like the serpent like stretching through the sky. And it wasn't until later after this that I was reading about the third mansion on another astrology, like an astrological magician's blog, where she was talking about her process of creating the talisman. And she was talking about the mythology of the Pleiades and everything. And turns out that a huge part of the mythology of the Pleiades involves a celestial dragon. And I had not read that before I did this ritual. So when I read that, that was confirmation to myself, like what I was seeing in my head wasn't like from me, that was something that was true, that was external to me. And being able to like recognize that is super important. And that's one of the elements, I think, one of the reasons I think these magicians had such a problem with the psi experiments, because this is a thing that you have to overcome when you're doing remote viewing work, is this problem of analytical overlay, where basically, like when you're doing remote viewing, like a lot of people have a very strong misconception of what remote viewing actually is. Like you're not physically seeing another place. Like even the word remote viewing is kind of a misnomer. It should really be remote sensing, because you can use all your senses. And you're really just seeing stuff in your head. You're using your imagination, same as if you were sitting there and daydreaming. The idea, though, is that when you're doing the remote viewing, you try not to make sense of anything that you're getting. You try to just let information come through with no analysis.
Right.
Because once you start analyzing things, it breaks down and you start to form this image in your head of what you're looking at. And it's almost never right? If you just let all the components of it come through. Like another quick example, when I was doing remote viewing training, we had a target, all we had for the target was just a set of numbers. That was our target. No information at all other than that. And when I started to remote view that target coordinate, what I saw in my head was I had the sense that it was something that was man-made. It was not like organic. It was metallic. I could tell that it was rotating. It was like rotating motion. I could see the colors red, white, and blue. And I felt like it was a red and white object that was in a field of like blue. And I could tell that there were people inside it or on it. But at that point, when I was doing the viewing, I started thinking airplane. Like the rotation was like a prop on a propeller plane, right? And it was like a red and white small airplane, and it was in the sky, and that's why everything was blue. So that's what I, turned in for my report. Turns out the actual target was a riverboat, like an old-timey riverboat with a big wheel on it.
Yeah.
And it was a red and white riverboat, and it had people standing on the deck, and it was, in the water. So I had all of the little elements right. I was spot on.
But then when I started to let my brain fill in the gaps, it told me a story, and that story wasn't real. The story was just my imagination. And I think that that's something that not many magicians are like trained in doing. And I think it actively inhibits things like psi work. Like you have to just kind of like let the stuff come to you without interpreting anything. And it's tough to do. It's not easy to do that. Yeah, no, definitely. All right.
I have the only time in my entire life since I've been doing magic that I have ever experienced what I consider to be an external spirit communication was I was laying in bed, which was a couch at an apartment I was staying at in Towson last year. I had probably done my daily ritual like a few hours beforehand, but I do that every day and nothing ever happens. Laying down to go to bed, not really thinking of anything, and a woman's voice came into my head and just said, "Thanks." But the sensation was so specific. It's very difficult to describe. That is the only time that I can say, from everything I understand about how how people hear spirits, that is what I experienced, was like a very clearly external source, but in my own head.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another thing, just on like my experiences with ESP and psychic phenomena in general. Last October, I wanted to go to Gettysburg for Halloween. I'd never been there on Halloween. I'd been there plenty of times on other days, but I wanted to go for Halloween. My girlfriend she loves horror movies, but she does not like actual paranormal things. Like, she just freaks her out. But because it was Halloween and my birthday, she decided to come. We get there. She's feeling really uneasy. She's feeling really weird. We're going to go on a ghost tour. We're sitting in the parking lot 2 hours before the tour begins. She starts complaining that she's feeling a burning sensation around her knee and that everything else beneath the knee on her right leg was numb. She could no longer feel her calf, not her calf, but like everything below the knee was totally numb. But her knee itself was like burning, like red hot. She didn't know why. We go on the tour. The second stop we stop at, the guy starts telling us about this lawyer who had no military training whatsoever, but decided to like sign up, and he got put in charge of like a whole unit, and he ended up getting that entire unit killed by charging into battle when he was told specifically not to. He got his leg shot off by a cannonball at the knee.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And like when she heard that, she just broke down. And she claims that something has not been right ever since then. But other less impressive things have happened with her similar to that. But that was like my confirmation that she was in touch with something much more other.
Sure. All right. We're out of time. Let's continue this in the Patreon. But where can people find you guys? Octavian?
StrangeDominionspodcast.com. We have a Facebook and Instagram, and that's about it.
Wren?
Hey, liminalroom.com. I'm also on Twitter at liminalbird.
All right, I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons for their support. Without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Andrew Malone, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Illuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, CJ, Corey Nelson, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, John Hewling, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Matthew Brown, Lauren McLean, No One, Ole Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Roland Belstadt, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sarah Horgan, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Stevie Norman, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, The Esoteric Book Club Podcast, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K., Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Wren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very much for the support. All right, if you enjoyed that conversation, there's a pretty lengthy Patreon that I think was actually almost better than the main show. That'll be available for patrons, and if you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month. It helps us out greatly. You get content every month, every show, pretty much you get extra content. With a few rare exceptions, you get some extra stuff thrown in. You get the shows a week early and commercial free. So a lot of bonuses for just $3 a month. And again, it helps out the show a lot. So consider becoming a patron. Go to whereDidTheRoadGo.com and click on the big Patreon link. I also want to throw out a special thanks to Matt Neubauer, who went and found my Amazon wish list on the page and picked something out off of that. I appreciate that. Thank you. And also a thanks to James Hamilton for a donation back when I was not feeling so great. That definitely helped. Thank you. And I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.